Let's take a closer look at stockholders' equity. Look at this. I'm going all out this time for the Let's Take a Closer Look series. I've got a cape. Got my nice little Sherlock Holmes cape. Let's go ahead and take this off and get right to work. We're talking about stockholders' equity. Now, many of you know that there's two classes of stock when it comes to stockholders' equity. There's common stock and preferred stock. Preferred stock is not required to be in a corporation, but common stock is. So at a minimum, you have to have common stock. Another classification of stock is three different types of stock in a corporation: authorized shares, issued shares, and outstanding shares. I'm going to use a little demonstration. Let's take a closer look, right? Going through a demonstration. A little simple example using something real interesting of how I like to help you remember the rules of authorized versus issued versus outstanding shares of stock. And these rules, authorized, issued, outstanding shares of stock, they can apply to common stock or preferred stock, either one. Now, most accounting faculty, the way they like to describe authorized, issued, and outstanding shares of stock are like the three layers of earth. You've got the outer layer of earth, which you can think of like the amount of shares authorized in a corporation, the crust. Then you've got the middle layer, which that is similar to the issued shares of stock. And then you've got the core in the middle, core, the last layer. That one is the shares of stock outstanding. Now again, earth, but we can't actually see those layers. We can't see them in real time. So I've got a great little example for you, and it involves candy. Not just any candy, but the world's biggest Jawbreaker. Woo! Look at the size of that thing. This thing is huge. I'm not talking about all those small little ones. This thing is huge. Let's go ahead and let's pull this out just to see how big it is. This thing's got to weigh at least 5 pounds. It's the size of a softball. Look at the size of this thing. Don't need my magnifying glass for this one. You can put that away, right? It's like a shot put. This thing is so heavy. Man, take me years to go through this thing. This huge piece of candy. Look at the size of that thing. Man, that's huge. So the idea here is if you've ever gone through, licked your way through, which many of us we haven't because this would take, again, years. If you ever licked your way through a Jawbreaker, there's many layers in this. Now, there's way more than 3, but you get the general idea that there's different levels, and the outer level encompasses more size, more shares of stock, okay? So they actually have they show you on the picture here of the Mega Bruiser Jawbreaker. They show you the little layers. Of course, we know there's many layers on this big daddy, this big boy. So on the outer layer, we've got shares of stock authorized. This is what's authorized by the corporate charter. This is the maximum. Now, of course, the corporate charter could be amended. So if we put 100,000 shares and our corporation grows, we can go back and we can amend the corporate charter following the rules for amending, whether it has to be by vote of the shareholders, board of directors, whatever it is. Usually shareholders have to vote on that respective item. So authorized shares are the total possible ever. And almost all corporations, they never get to that maximum amount. Then the next layer down is shares issued. These are stock that actually we printed out stock certificates. They've actually been printed and sent out. Of course, these days now everything is electronic, so electronically they've been registered. Those shares of stock have been registered. So that's the middle layer. And then the inner layer, a number of shares of stock outstanding, that's the number of shares. Basically, take the number of issued shares minus treasury stock. Remember what treasury stock is? That's when the corporation buys back its own shares of stock. So all those shares that have actually been printed or, again, sent out electronically, if the corporation buys back any of those shares, we subtract that from the number of shares issued and we get the treasury stock. We get the number of shares outstanding. We take the issued shares minus treasury stock to get the number of shares outstanding. The outstanding shares, very important because when you're calculating dividends, cash dividends, stock dividends, we're using that number. Not issued, not authorized. We're using the number of outstanding shares to determine the cash dividend and the stock dividend, who actually is getting the dividend. Because you're not going to pay the corporation itself, right? If you're not going to pay to authorize, those haven't been printed out. You're not going to pay to The issued, because some of those are treasury stock the corporation owns, that'd be taking money out of one pocket and paying the other. So the idea here, always think common stock, preferred stock, two types of stock. Classes of stock, we've got authorized, issued, and outstanding. Authorized is the max, so think of that as the outer layer, right? Think about this huge jawbreaker when you're thinking of this distinction. Outer layer encompasses the whole, all possible, the maximum. Then the next layer down, we've got issued. Those are shares that have actually been printed or electronically signed out, registered. And then finally, outstanding, we're taking issued minus treasury stock being what the corporation has bought back. So again, keep that in mind. Keep in mind this big boy whenever you're thinking, and you have to remember the rules of authorized versus issued versus outstanding shares of stock.